So good morning, everyone, from Rotterdam in the Netherlands, or good afternoon or good evening, depending where you're joining us from. Let's give it another couple of minutes to see if more people are going to join the session. But for now, welcome, and let's give us one more minute to wait for a few more people to join.
Maj-Britt or Jim, you can share your screen right now.
So, okay, I think we can give it a start anyway. Thank you everyone for joining. My name is Gisela Papagadalambu. I'm going to be the moderator of this session. And in my normal life, I'm the Executive Director of the Erasmus Research Institute of Management at the Erasmus University of Rotterdam. Today, our session is about sustainable built environment and governance through actor-led processes. And we have, in the end, two speakers today, joining us from, I think, the US and Denmark, if I'm not mistaken. Before we start, I would like to do some housekeeping with you today. We have another hour ahead of us for this session. And in the right side of your screen, you're going to see some functions about chatting and Q&A. In the chat function, you can write any technical issues you're facing, and the background team is going to help you with that. And there's also one tab for Q&A. Please type all your questions there for us. So it's the Q&A tab that we're going to use to ask the questions to the speakers. So enough with the housekeeping as well. Let's give it a start. So we know that global population growth is essentially urban population growth. And that means that most of the water-related challenges and the solutions reside within the urban areas or urban catchments. That means that urban areas face the combined and accumulated impact of sea level rise, climate change, but also combined with aging or even lacking infrastructure for all the water-related activities in the areas. We know very well that water management and water governance in the urban areas need to be improved, and otherwise insecurity of water is going to combine with the urban flooding and heat stress is going to probably lead to social instability or even massive migration from the urban areas elsewhere. We know very well that we need integrated solutions to face all these challenges we have in order to transit to water-wise urban areas and water-wise cities. Integration, of course, needs systems thinking, but another word we should use is inclusivity. So we need to be inclusive in our approaches in order to put the governance and the people at the core of what the solutions we're going to design. We heard earlier at the webinar that water governance and water management shouldn't just be technocratic, but they should also touch upon across all aspects of society. So that's a very short introduction, and I think I would like to give the floor to our first speaker today, who is Maj-Britt Quitzau. I hope that said it correctly, from Aalborg University in Denmark. And considering we have only two speakers, please take your time, and you have 15 minutes ahead for your presentation. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. Yes, I hope that you can see my slides. So thank you very much for inviting me for this. I think it's really important that we have this session, which is more focused on processes, because I think it's a really important element when we talk about the integration of these different societal aspects and so on in climate adaptation. So I'm very happy to be able to present some of our research and thoughts here. I've done the research together with a bunch of colleagues from the Planning for Urban Sustainability at Aalborg University, and we're working on a project within the Coast to Coast Climate Challenge about visual representations and how you can use visual representations to mobilize value creation in nature-based solutions. Very shortly about the background is that what we see is a move away, at least in Denmark, from technical infrastructure to nature-based solutions. And that provides a very interesting platform to actually begin to create value locally. Because when we are on the surface of the city, when we do technical interventions there in terms of infrastructures, then it's actually also benefiting the city, depending, of course, of how we create these systems. So this is why this kind of shift allows to really rethink the technical infrastructure and to work much more integratively in terms of creating local value. In terms of our research perspective, what we are really interested in is what we could call viability and the strategic concern that it is. So we think that practitioners and researchers, we are very good in terms of having visions about climate adaptation and so on. But it's actually a big struggle actually to work on actually implementing and creating this kind of change in real life processes. So if you look at the literature within strategic planning, you will see that it's widely recognized that often plans do not create the intended results. And one of the explanations for that is that sometimes the dialogue that takes place both within the technical domain, but also together with different stakeholders, is often too superficial. So it results in a kind of tacit employment of frames of understanding, and that interferes with collaboration, learning, and creativity. So what happens is that we see that it's actually very difficult in practice to create this kind of value that is actually the ambition in these projects. And we are very inspired by relational theories, including like the idea of the translation from Calong, which is a theoretical framework that helps us to understand the facilitative or navigational task that is involved in making a plan or vision viable. I've just mentioned the moments of translation on the right side. So what it's really about is to really recognize that you really need to understand the matters of concern that are involved. You need to understand that different stakeholders have different programs of action. So although we want to create value with our project, maybe the technical engineers want something else, maybe people living there want something else. So we need to understand that these kind of developments actually take place in some kind of battlefield almost. And so as a planner, we have the challenge of needing to convince others that we want to create this value, and also try to figure out which kind of value out of all these possibilities do we actually want to promote. And that's what we call interestment, or what Long calls interestment, in terms of can we convince them to go the same way as others might go and find a direction. And then they talk about enrollment and mobilization in the sense of really ensuring that people like stay in this line of thought, in this direction of thought. But the idea with this idea of translation is this strategic work that is necessary to convince others to involve in this kind of process, and also the acknowledgement that there are these different types of matters of concern, and that we need to be more aware of them and be able to address these. So our main research question is actually, how can technical planners develop and facilitate viable nature-based solutions that add substantial value to local development? And we've included two figures here, and on the right-hand side you can see we try to depict different types of stakeholders, and we think there's both like a horizontal element and a vertical element. So in terms of the horizontal, what we see in Denmark is that typically climate adaptation projects are anchored in the technical part of the municipality, and what you want to do is to expand towards the more social and societal scopes of other types of departments. So that's really difficult, because you have in the municipalities are typically very siloed. So you have different matters of concern, so to say, in different parts that work with different aspects. So the technical thing in one way, health and education in other ways, etc. And that takes some kind of skill to be able to look across these kind of different elements. And then there's the vertical, is that you need to also recognize that there are a certain amount of resources that politicians and directors actually decide upon. So you need somehow also to interest and enroll them. And at the same time, you also want to develop solutions that end users and local citizens would find great for their daily life. So the whole idea of the good city. And so you also need to work downwards, so to say, and get involvement there. And what we want to work with is how can visual representation play into this kind of dialogue and this kind of strategic facilitation process, where we try to see if we can bridge these different matters of concern, both horizontally and vertically, so to say. I would like to use the case of Hedensted municipality as an example. We did some action research together with them, where we were involved in trying to facilitate that they talk about value creation. And so they're tackling climate-induced water challenges in the northeast part of Hedensted municipality. And it's a lowland area affected by rising sea and groundwater and also heavy rainfalls. And the project leader here is sitting in plan and development. It is, as a starting point, a technical climate adaptation project, but they're very eager to develop some kind of value creation through it. It has a technical starting point, so they started off with doing some risk mapping through some technical 3DI models. They have done some general stakeholder mapping in terms of finding out interest and values. They did some place analysis to describe local characteristics and strengths, and they developed the kind of report you see on the right-hand side. And the original program of action is very much the climate adaptation project, and it has this very technical. We need to solve these problems with flooding, etc. And so the value creation is like a little bit an add-on to that, and that's very characteristic for these processes. So what we've done in terms of visualizations, initiatives to widen their horizon during the facilitation, is that we've tried to go into a dialogue with them about how can we try to see some of the most social or societal aspects. So for example, we see that there's something in terms of understanding. They have a lot of knowledge in the municipality, but it's in different areas, it's very broad and general, and they're not very systematic about how they use it. So we've tried to help them to be more specific about identify local actors and qualities, understand the matters of concern. And for example, as one kind of tool, we developed these kind of postcards. So they kind of have like some kind of idea about what do different stakeholders actually want and who are they and so on. The next thing is more in terms of representation. It seems like this data is kind of a little bit evades them. It kind of slips out of their fingers, so they don't remember everything. And by producing this kind of visual representation, it seems that it helps them to kind of recall or remember, you know, who are the relevant actor, and also to position them geographically on a map. So try to kind of get an overview. And the last part we see is in terms of making decision, taking a direction, narrowing in. There we see how the visualizations can be used for sharing and talking about values, discussing directions, seeing each other's positions, and also work with co-design solutions, for example. So we think that visual representations represents a very interesting, what we would call in this type of theory, an interestment and alignment tool. And it's very much inspired by cartography, so simple maps, you know, as we all know it, that is used to represent complex realities in a simple way. And we think they can really summarize and communicate these valuation narratives across stakeholders. And what we also see is that they are very good at verifying and legitimizing certain data or understandings. So the citizens, for example, they feel that the municipalities have heard them when they can see they are on the map, and they see that they understand the kind of values they want to bring in. And we see that the visual representations can either be still as a planning tool where the planners sit and use it to get an overview, but it can also be more dynamic in the terms of being together in a kind of a workshop, a dialogue, where it's used as a co-design tool. So just an example from Hedensted with an internal workshop where where one of the planner invited some colleagues from other departments that are not technical and do not normally work with climate adaptation, and they were invited to discuss some common points of interest. And you can see that the map on the left hand was kind of the starting points, and they used that to kind of discuss, where do we have projects, what kind of matters of concern do we have, where are we present in the area. And then they ended up with the map on the right hand side, where you can see a lot of scribbling and pictures, and where they kind of discuss, okay, where do we see some hotspots, where there's some common interest. And there was a lot of good energy coming out of this meeting, where they kind of shook hands and said, okay, we need to collaborate better and to kind of combine some of these issues. So for example, there was something about cultural heritage for one area. They recognized some need for development of local housing areas in some of the areas. And they could really see how they could combine this with the whole idea of investing some money for the climate adaptation project in the area. So the conclusion is that what we see is that municipalities, at least in a Danish context, they really struggle to address the broader value creation in climate adaptation. They normally go into this like technical direction. So it's new for them to open up in this way. And they also develop solutions that resonate. So that's what we need to do, to develop solutions that resonate with local and municipal values. And in order to do that, we think that this issue of viability is really important to address, that you actually go deeper into understanding the matters of concern and these sort of things. And we find that this work with visual representation is very interesting and something that we want to further work with. And one of the challenges we see is where do you integrate the visual representations in the decision process, and how do you make room for working with the visual representations as part of the municipal planning practice. So that's some of the things we will further look into our research. But that's our experiences. So thank you for listening, and I'm open for question and so on. And yeah, we just had a slide with references also.
Thank you very much, Maj-Britt. I think there are no questions right now, but while other people are thinking, I would start with my questions to you. I always find it very interesting when people share the success stories. I think it's important to know successes, but for me, it's very educational to know what are the failures and what went wrong, because I think we can learn from that as well. So I wanted you to be brave and just share with us what went wrong and how we can learn from that, if anything went wrong.
Yeah, I don't know whether anything went wrong, but it's like a pilot study. So in that sense, we are kind of trying a little bit, what works, what does not work. And for example, one of the things, so it's kind of trial and error. And one of the things that is actually really difficult is how do you represent things visually? How should the icons look like? It sounds very simplistic, but it's actually a huge discussion. So do you just have words? I mean, as you saw on one of the maps, it was just words. Is it cartoon drawings? Is it free drawings? Is it very beautiful icons? And what we saw is that some of the attempts to visualize that we didn't work for some stakeholders, and we need to go back to the drawing table, so to say, and really think about, how should we develop these kind of things. And another point, which is maybe a little bit more content-wise, is the difficulty of this being like this takes resources. So it's very difficult to get the practitioners to actually have time to do this kind of work. So right now it's research assistants that are doing this kind of work, which are outside of the municipality. But I would see a definite challenge if the municipality itself had to do it. So it has been struggling to get them to use the amount of hours necessary for this. So I think there's also some facilitation in terms of ensuring, the right resources to facilitate this. And then something we haven't addressed yet is this I mean, visualization can do a lot of things, but it's also like a simplification of a very sophisticated system. So for example, right now, we're not very good at visualizing the technical system and the systemic, you know, these are systems that are very complex. And so we need also to find a way to bridge between these more societal factors, which were represented very well, and then the technical models. And that's something we haven't been addressing so much, and we need definitely to figure that out. Yeah, so that was 3 points, I think, where we're definitely struggling a bit.
Yeah, thank you for being brave and sharing with us. I have some follow-up questions, but I think I'm gonna leave it for the end when we have some more time to for an open dialogue. And I think it's time to thank you very much, Maj-Britt, for your presentation. It's time to move on to our second speaker, and that will be Jim Cooper from Arcadis. So welcome, Jim, and the floor is all yours.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So I'll be talking about a framework to promote sustainability in both natural and built water assets. The framework is called the Envision Rating Framework, and it's something that's been created from the Institute for Sustainable Infrastructure. I'll tell you a bit about the framework and then focus about half my presentation on just some project examples. So if you're not familiar with the Institute for Sustainable Infrastructure, it is a program that was developed back in 2012, a collaboration between the Harvard University Graduate School of Design, the American Public Works Association, American Society of Civil Engineers, and Council of Engineering Companies. They all came together and basically said that we need a way to guide and develop sustainability credentialing and evaluation of projects that are not, you know, buildings or buildings that are typically occupied by people, like hospitals or schools or workplaces, etc. We want a rating system that looks at sustainability for infrastructure and natural, you know, assets like green infrastructure, gray infrastructure, etc. So the Envision framework was developed to essentially enable and provide a robust process for natural and built infrastructure, and that goes beyond just water infrastructure that I'll talk about in a minute. But also, you know, many types of infrastructure that we rely on as communities. So fast forward to today, and this infrastructure has been applied to hundreds of projects and tens of billions of euros of infrastructure all across the world. So what is the type of infrastructure that is rated through this Envision framework? As you see here, there's a broad list that applies to all types of civil infrastructure, including roads, bridges, pipelines, railways, airports, dams, levees, etc. It's not designed, like I said, to evaluate buildings. It's really there to fill a gap between those rating systems that were very specific to maybe one sector or one type of infrastructure. So if I talk a bit about the credits and what the framework looks like, there's a total of 64 credits across 5 categories. And if you've seen the Envision framework in the past, note that this is on the essentially version 3 of the framework. It's evolved over time. The credits and categories have changed over time as well. So it's continued to be refined as the framework's applied and as there's feedback on things that can be changed. As you can see here, the 5 categories are quality of life, which focuses on well-being, mobility, broader community, leadership, which focuses on collaboration, you know, planning, the broader economy impacted by that infrastructure, resource allocation, so the materials that are used, the resourcing of those materials, the consumption of resources such as energy and water throughout the project, both during construction and the full life cycle of the project. The natural world, right? So conservation, ecology, siting, and then climate and resilience. And I'll be talking a little bit more about those credits briefly. So if you take away one key message from my presentation, it is that Envision is a framework. It is not simply a rating system. So there's many components to the framework. As you can see here, there's a guidance manual, which is used to essentially evaluate and plan for a project. There's a pre-assessment checklist before you even begin to go down evaluating the sustainability of your project. There's online score sheets. There's a credentialing service. There are, I think, well over 1,000 Envision sustainability professionals that have certified and maintain certification and continuing educations in this credential, and that allows you the ability to actually rate and submit projects for an Envision score or verification and awards. So that's the last piece, is the project verification and awards. I think people, when you think about evaluating a project or evaluating a sustainability of a planned project or something that's already been constructed, we kind of immediately jump to, well, let's score it and see how well we did. And really, you should be starting well before the project's even designed, right? And into the early planning stages to set up the project to be sustainable and incorporate different things throughout the project. I'll talk a bit about that. So why sustainability in natural and built water infrastructure? If you haven't seen this graph, I think it's a good one, looking at on the left, on the x-axis, is the ecological footprint of every country. And basically every dot is a country around the globe. And the y-axis on the bottom is the Human Development Index, right? So we would hope that we increase our Human Development Index, which is a rating, and we would hope that we would minimize at the same time our ecological footprint. And when you do that, you end up in the bottom right quadrant, which is called the sustainability quadrant. You can see that most countries are outside of that. There's a few just highlighted there. But certainly we have a need to be more sustainable, and I don't think I need to prove that point here in the time that I have. So this is another graph pointing to a comment that I already made, right? That we need to think about sustainability in our projects early, right? So this is looking at the project timeline, and you see the ability to make changes is very high when we just start planning, and very low as we go through construction. And then opposite of that, the cost to make changes is very low in the planning stage and very high in the construction stage, right? So for these reasons, if we want to have a true impact on sustainability of our projects, we need to do it early in planning rather than even in design, and certainly not construction. Just go through a couple examples. This example is for New York City. The New York City Department of Design and Construction embedded Envision requirements into their engineering design standards. So this is a city that's not simply looking at rating their projects and seeing how sustainable they are, but embedding it within their process, their planning process, their design process. And as a result, they've seen significant sustainability benefits. Here's one example of a rather, I'll say it, typical civil engineering project. This project was a wastewater treatment plant that required upgrades to the preliminary treatment capacity, improved flow, solids, and grit distribution to primary settling tanks. And they applied the Envision framework and achieved a number of things that most likely would not have been achieved without applying Envision throughout the full planning, design, and construction phases. Increased energy efficiency, strategic use of landscaping and the environment, strategic stakeholder engagement, sustainable procurement and reused materials are just some of the benefits for that project. Another project, quite different one. So this is looking at increasing capacity of a pump station. And through that project, there is sediment issues and many benefits achieved again through that project. Yet another one, again, a core pumping station that was designed, including a new levee due to significant flooding in the area. And as a result, they, added a new trail on the levee, had playground improvements, and essentially the public ended up voting to fund the project. So stakeholder engagement was critical throughout this project. So I talked about all of the categories. Here's just a long list of all the individual credits and certifications that Envision sustainability professional looks at when they dive into all the details. I'm certainly not going to go through them all, but the website that you've probably seen on there, sustainableinfrastructure.org, can provide a lot more details on that. When you are going into the process of evaluating projects, I mentioned the manual, and this is just an example of looking at one credit. So this is improving quality of life, and then the well-being category, and then the very first one is improve community quality of life. And you see you have all these different levels of achievement and guides of what you've achieved, whether it's improved, enhanced, restoring, restorative, right? So there's a number of different categories, and you essentially go through the work that's done on that project to evaluate all those categories. So I know I could talk about this for a long time. There's a lot of details here, but certainly happy to take any questions and answers either now or towards the end as well. With that, I thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Jim. Really nice presentation, very interesting. Again, I'm waiting for people to come up with questions, but I think I'm gonna start with my question. Certainly you have no time to go through all the details, but you did mention that one of the projects, the stakeholder engagement was key, it was very critical. And I wonder how that process was related to the framework itself. So maybe in a few words, how does that work?
Sure. So within one of the categories, community is a key piece of that. And you can get into the details of their specific credits for how you interact with the community and how you interact with stakeholders. And, through that process, again, you start early, you start in the planning phase. And I'm familiar with a project where it was intended to basically design a new large pump station in a residential area. And through stakeholder engagement, through that Envision process, they ended up putting essentially a stream or a built stream through the area, did not have the pump station constructed. And that was all through simply following that process, which probably would not have been done, or at least not as structured, right? I think we typically try to engage stakeholders some, but having community feedback sessions and just many different ways that you can interact with stakeholders that you learn about as you say, okay, well, if I want to do better on this specific credit, what are the things that I need to do, which can guide you in that direction.
I see. I love structure, so I think that sounds really important if you want to go through such a complicated process. And I also love the message of being proactive around the projects we design. So that's super important. Thank you very much. And on that note, thank you very much, Jim, for your presentation. And we're going to slowly but surely move to our last speaker for today, who is Nanco Dolman. So welcome, Nanco, and the floor is all yours.
Okay. I'll share the screen. Yeah. I'm going to talk about developing new blue-green futures. It's actually the name of the research project, but it's about perceptions of implementation of blue-green infrastructure. The project is focusing on the evaluation from grey to green infrastructure, blue-green, and also hybrid infrastructure. It's funded by the British Academy in the UK and a collaboration of the University of Nottingham, who's the lead partner, together with the University of Nottingham in Ningbo in China, Reed College in Portland, and Haskoning DHV. And we're in this research, we aiming for the professional community who are working with blue-green infrastructure and tackle or research in the overcoming barriers between whether they are going to be implemented or not, and what is the success factor or the barrier in that case. And we used 4 international case studies from a whole array of international leaders in blue-green infrastructure. We included Rotterdam in the Netherlands, Ningbo in China, Newcastle in the United Kingdom, and Portland in the USA. Rotterdam is known, of course, as the demonstration or city in the Netherlands as a delta city, one of the few cities that has built-up areas outside the dike system protected by the Maaslandkering. One of the famous projects is, of course, the Water Square. And another city we did research in was Ningbo in China, part of the Sponge City program. And also has a historical relation with the water systems, and especially implementing blue-green infrastructure on a bigger scale, like the Eco Corridor in Ningbo. Also included Newcastle for its role model city in the UK, building on SUDS, sustainable drainage systems, improving resilience to future flooding while maximizing social and environmental benefits. And this is one of the examples. They're working in the Newcastle Great Park development. Started with the SUDS ponds, but that is connected to the natural water systems as an overflow system as well, and a habitat. And the 4th case study, Portland, Oregon in the USA. And known for its bigger scale rain gardens and green streets. And particularly also looking for reducing nuisance from flooding, improving water quality, and enhancing fish habitat. And these are some examples of the green streets. In the research, we used different methods. So first, we started with an online questionnaire. We invited 20 participants per case study. And we developed a so-called implicit association test, an IAT, to investigate the preference of blue-green or grey infrastructure. So both explicit as implicit. For that, we invited 12 participants, and we finalized that with a series of interviews. The questionnaire was online, and we had to do that in the native language. So both in Chinese, but also in American English, both in British English as well. And that is important because of the implicit, explicit preferences. And interesting, one of the questions we asked was how frequently do different functions drive BGI projects? Now we noticed that most of all, let's say, cities chose for water management. So BGI are implemented to in the case of flood management or drainage or water surface water storage. And less obvious functions include groundwater recharge, reducing air pollution, or even carbon sequestration, interesting enough. A little bit similar question was about multiple benefits of BGI, and interesting is the same. It was chosen the answer that it is about flood risk, stormwater management. And interesting is that Newcastle also 100% indicated it is also about groundwater recharge and river base flows. And the city of Portland in the US, it is also about noise reduction, the green streets, for instance. We also asked about familiarity with options to using urban water as a resource. And of course, the most famous option is rainwater harvesting. less more obvious is also it can be used for cooling or irrigation, aquifer thermal energy storage. And maybe more interesting is about the stakeholders. So for implementing blue-green infrastructure, a lot of parties are involved. And we asked who is leading the way in implementing BGI and who should. So there are two differences. So we have the current situation, who is leading, and the potential situation, who should lead. And interesting enough is that in the current situation, most of the city cases indicate that local governments are in the lead, but who should lead the way, I think, is more into the developers who are in the heart of the developments. And when looking at more the differentiated answers of the different cities, there's a distinct difference between, let's say, the more Western or the Anglo-Saxon regions and, for instance, China. In China, they indicated a very strong position of the local government and almost non-involvement of community. And who should lead the way is a more average between all the parties, but also a very distinct indication from Newcastle that consultants and developers should lead the way. And this formed the base for the implicit association test. And this was completely new because this kind of social psychology tool exists, but not really for climate resilient or urban development projects. And these kinds of tools may overcome some of the issues with explicit tests. So that is to let's say, the rationale. So that is the best decision you can do from your profession or your education. It highlights attitudes that people were not aware that they had. And the objective is, of course, to assess subconscious, the implicit perceptions. And these are some examples of characteristics, both explicit measures or implicit measures. So you see that for instance, it assumes as an individual knows and can articulate their beliefs, so that's explicit. And implicit, not dependent on participants' awareness on the strengths of associations. So it's more academic definition for that. We developed that IIT like a sort of game. It was online and people had to press on words, positive or negative words, or blue, green versus gray words. And we switched the words from left to right, and it also kept track on the time, because it is about the implicit. So it is really about the speed you have an answer. And for this, also very important that we translate it in both the native languages for the people, the targeted people. Interesting is that these are some of the results. So the left bar indicates the implicit preferences, and the right bar the explicit. And really interesting is that the light blue bar is the let's say the preference for blue-green infrastructure, and implicit, it would be chosen, let's say, more than explicit. So it is more about the rationale. And you can also see the dark blue part of the bar. That is actually the implementation of gray infrastructure. So there's a slight difference as well. And this is a more differentiated result for the different categories we asked relating to blue-green infrastructure, like safety, attractiveness, tidiness, usefulness, the value, the necessity. And there are differences, but not that big difference. So it would be interesting to do maybe an extension on this research also for communities, and not really only the professional communities as well. So to conclude, some results. So BGI is increasingly acknowledged as a strategy in adaptation to climate change and enhancing urban livability. Socio-political factors, governance and population dynamics has influenced perceptions of the socio-political drivers for BGI implementation. It was the first time that the implicit association test about BGI was focused on professional stakeholders. Respondents implicitly and explicitly prefer BGI and regard it as a safer, tidier, more attractive, useful, valuable, and necessary solution. Personal perceptions are not barriers to implementation of BGI in the professional stakeholder respective cities, as previously assumed. Yet transformative change, and that's beyond adaptation, in policy and practice towards truly multifunctional infrastructure is needed to optimize the delivery of multiple BGI benefits. So it's not only about blue-green infrastructure, but also to find the right combination in hybrid infrastructure, like combinations with gray. For additional reading or viewing, we have a whole collections of blogs. We have 2 publications, one in the Water Journal and the British Academy Journal, and a whole series of webinars that has been recorded and can be viewed later. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nanco. Very, very interesting. And of course, as a Rotterdammer, I'm very proud that Rotterdam came very much high up in this framework. It is what I read in the paper. I'm still waiting for our participants to send questions. So I'm going to start with my question again. And I think we can slowly also move to the discussion part. We have 15 minutes left in this session. So one question for Nanco, and then we can move on to the open dialogue. You mentioned this was run, the study was run for professional stakeholders. So I'm assuming people working in local government. This is what you mean, or what kind of stakeholders?
Actually, there was we made a selection of local regional governments, but also urban designers, planners, also from the financial consultants as well. So there was a very broad representation from different expertise, and even people who are installing or implementing blue-green, like making a eco roof.
Okay.
So yeah.
That's a very wide range of stakeholders.
That's quite range, but it was really difficult to, let's say, to keep, to sort of to find, of course, all those communities. Especially, I'm not that familiar with the Chinese community, because but I think it's definitely something to expand maybe a little bit more.
That was my follow-up question, because especially, I mean, I know the UK and the Dutch governance system in the water sectors, and they're completely different. So I was wondering, how did you really define the stakeholders in the first place? How did you define the people you're going to ask the questions to?
I already said that we worked with a group. So we had for instance, in Ningbo in China, we had our local representative from the Ningbo University who made the selection. So I was the linking pin for Rotterdam because I know the community. I stayed sort of in contact with the participants. And in the UK, that was Emily O'Donnell, and we had Reed College in Portland, who connected with the community in Portland itself. So
local knowledge is actually key in this case.
Yeah, I definitely say yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And my follow-up again, you mentioned you would like to expand this to the wider public, if I'm not mistaken. And what do you think it would take for this to go public, to go to the stakeholders of the city? To say.
I would say, because we now limited it to, let's say, the professional community. Yeah, so everyone sort of, okay, I'm educated, or I'm sort of influenced or inspired by blue-green infrastructure, but it's really interesting to see how inhabitants or people in the city itself, in the neighborhoods, in the districts, are sort of appreciating blue-green infrastructure or greener urban spaces. That would be interesting. And maybe this could, like the IAT already said, this is a sort of game. I also liked it because it was not really sort of beyond the academic research a little bit, because you can actually also replace the words by images, for instance. And it would be interesting to sort of play or to see what the community or the people itself would prefer, what their preferences are.
Yeah. And I was wondering, thank you very much. And that said, I mean, I think it's a very good connection to open up the floor to discuss with the rest of the speakers. So please, Maj-Britt and Jim, switch on your cameras as well. Fantastic, thank you. You're still here. That's good to know. And taking up from Nanco's last comment that maybe it's for engaging with the inhabitants of the city, I was wondering how the visualizing methods that Maj-Britt has used in her research could be of use here, or not. Is there any connection there you could make? Oh, maybe it's not there anymore.
You're asking me? I thought you were asking.
Yes. No, I was asking you.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, definitely. I think it's really important because especially in the case with the urban developers, that's exactly what we also experience, that's exactly the picture of these different disciplines that you need to bring into it. So trying to understand, developers, or how do they see that, and I guess also in these types of urban development areas, it would make great sense to include, this kind of visualization of the data to better discuss across the different disciplines. So I think it could be quite interesting to use this sort of different way of having the dialogue, because I think once nothing's happening, it's also because it's difficult to talk across these professional languages. And I think that's where the visualizations might support a little bit the involvement of these other stakeholders. Yeah, so it could be a tool to try to change the picture that Nanco showed in his figure in his presentation.
Yeah, it can be the common language. And I have a question for you, Maj-Britt, and then I'm going to go back to this interdisciplinary work that all of you touched upon. I think it's very interesting to discuss. But there's a question from someone anonymous. I'm sorry, I don't have the name of the person. How is the municipality putting in practice the outcomes of the study, Maj-Britt? That's an interesting one.
Yeah, specifically it's an action research project, so we are actually part of the process itself. So we sit together with them at the table when they have meetings, and we kind of support them. So you can say in that sense, we are actually holding their hand as they move along in the project. What we see is this kind of cross-disciplinary dialogue with the different planners. So they are kind of reaching out of their own department and try to establish this more relational work together. And then we can see that there's a shift. Typically Danish municipalities, when you say stakeholder involvement, they think a big meeting, with citizens. And now they begin to think it differently. They think more about hotspots, maybe we need to do something with the water in this place, and maybe we need to go out and talk to the people that lives in this place. So they are much more specific. And that's why it also relates to some of the work Nanco did, for example, that we actually more geographically specifically. So these are some of the outcomes we can see that the project is producing.
Yeah, I also wonder whether stakeholders can also be in the same organization sometimes. You mentioned fragmented knowledge within organizations, and we know that is true. We normally don't know what our colleague is doing next door. So maybe that's also a way for them to engage with the
we see it as a shortcut, because sometimes it's a very big process to go out and interview citizens, but actually within the departments in the municipality, you have people working with, sports and different, so they know about what citizens would like, and they have another context. So we see that as a kind of a shortcut to do that, rather than doing a big, of course you also need to do that, but you can figure out some information the other way around.
Totally understand it. But I wonder, especially for Nanco and Maj-Britt, and also please Jim chip in. You also have done action research, so research projects, and my question always is about research. What is the impact in the real world? So how can we take the research and put it out in practice? I think Maj-Britt also you touched upon that when you said what is the availability of resources within the municipalities for their employees to actually implement this. So shall we touch upon this? How can we make the research really count?
Yeah, that's an interesting question always. Like a sort of thinking about a market creation or a more application of results. I think for the case of Rotterdam, I'm most familiar with. Rotterdam is already working a lot with its community and inhabitants. For instance, with the initiative Water Sensitive Rotterdam, but also with the het Weerwoord. And there's a lot of sort of smaller initiatives throughout the city and also the community is really involved with. I showed you the water plaza at the Benthemplein. The Benthemplein was not the first designed water plaza, but it was a sort of second design where they thought, okay, we have to include all the stakeholders. What they developed was a sort of card game or let's say a sort of quartet to okay, what are the ingredients that you want to use the square for, together with all the stakeholders. And I think still, looking back at the research, I think it was really interesting to find several, let's say, the barriers or the success factors, but still we have to consider that all the 4 countries or regions are completely different, especially from governance and from social, cultural backgrounds. I still like the idea to sort of going forward, maybe with a sort of gamification, visualization. We also worked with Rotterdam in a 3D model, so more like a sort of digital twin, where you can actually already visualize the blue-green intervention, like a sort of urban design, or like a game for people who can actually see the co-benefits of those BGI, because it's still a sort of technical name for say maybe what it is really about greening your living environment.
Thank you very much for that. Yeah, Jim,
I can add a bit there. So my presentation was on the Envision framework, which is not necessarily research, right? It's been applied to hundreds and hundreds of projects. But in my experience, right, at Arcadis, I've done a lot with research. And, there's not one size fits all. We've talked about cultural differences across the regions. And I think for research, in my experience, to really scale across many different regions, many different clients, you need to be flexible in exactly what that research looks like. Sure, the approach can be pretty rigid, but really understanding what the individual's needs are and kind of adapting what the goals of research are to meet their needs is a way that I think you can see at scale. Like I mentioned, the Envision framework, it's on its 3rd revision, right? Because as we look at applying to different projects and as different regions, there's different needs that we need to incorporate in there. So ongoing revision, flexibility, I think, is key to scaling research.
Thank you for that. It's very important for us researchers. And maybe a short comment from you, looking at the time.
Yeah, I agree very much with what both Nanco and Jim say. But one thing I would point out is also this: when we are in action research, we're delivering like change, and we're really also changing the research itself because we make it more applicable. But I think one of the challenges we have is to broaden the experiences we have with that, because that's going in depth with one municipality, for example. And I think we have a responsibility in trying to bring that knowledge out to more municipalities, networking, and so on. And I think that's a bit of a challenge, not in scientific articles, but in something else in the professional arenas.
Yeah. And on that note, I think we have a lot of food for thought after this session. So I would like to thank you all for being here. Thank you to all our 3 speakers. Thank you very much. Thank you to you, audience, for being around, and just take these dialogues forward to your next sessions. Take care. Bye.